Okay, so 2 weeks ago, Dharma Shalin spoke about the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path as perfect vision. And perfect vision is translation of two Pali words, samadhi. And perfect vision is one way of translation, and it's Sangharakshita's way in his book on the Noble Eightfold Path. There are other ways, and Dharma Shalin alluded to this, and two other ways that are quite common is to translate samadhi as right view or skillful understanding. Right view or skillful understanding. And it's more along those lines that Mike and I are going to be speaking this evening. First point that struck me when I was thinking about this talk is that as human beings, we're always trying to understand and make sense of the situation we're in. And I don't mean that we're sort of thinking deeply about the meaning of life, or we're trying to understand things, in a specific way, like scientifically. I just mean we're trying to make sense of the world moment to moment, right now. We're trying to understand this situation and orienting ourselves in certain ways. And we do this first and foremost through stories. And we're generally quite unconscious of this activity because it's so sort of ubiquitous, but we're constantly telling ourselves stories about who we are, who other people are, and our sort of role in the situation we're in. And the fact is, sometimes these stories align with reality, and sometimes they definitely don't. And one of the most straightforward ways of thinking about right view is that you're coming to live on the basis of stories that accord with reality rather than don't accord with reality. Now, this might sound a bit abstract, so just to give you a much more specific and concrete and hopefully humorous feel for what I'm talking about, I want to read a poem, which is called The Cookie Thief by Valerie Cox. Some of you may be familiar with it. The Cookie Thief. A woman was waiting at an airport one night, with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shops, bought a bag of cookies and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in a book, but happened to see that the man sitting beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag in between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. So she munched the cookies and watched the clock as the gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I would blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. When only one was left, she wondered what he would do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve, and he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed to the gate, refusing to look back at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat. Then she sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned in despair. The others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. Okay, so that's The Cookie Thief, and a very funny poem, I think. I've read it quite a few times, and I still find it pretty funny. But it's humorous, but it makes the point that, sometimes we get things drastically wrong in the story we're telling ourselves about a situation and about other people. But she was so convinced that he was the cookie thief, and she was the one who was tolerating him. And it turned out that she was completely wrong in her view of that situation. And the fact is that, you know, we go throughout life with our sort of stories, our working hypotheses about other people, about ourselves, and about the way that our life is. And they are more or less accurate. And what we're trying to do with right view or skillful understanding is come to understand the world more as it really is, rather than how we would like it to be, or rather how we erroneously think it can be. And what we get in the Buddhist teachings are some very clear guidelines about how to do this and how to see the world in a more skillful, a wiser, a more compassionate way. And the traditional kind of lists you get when right view is being described are the Four Noble Truths, Three Marks of Existence, and Karma and Rebirth. Those are the main three ways in which right view is described. They're the ways that Sangharakshita goes into it in the first chapter of the book on the Eightfold Path. I want to explore, just for the rest of this talk, the Four Noble Truths as a way of understanding right view. Mitra Sara spoke about these 3 weeks ago. It seems a lot longer than that to me, but it was just 3 weeks ago. I'll briefly recap them and then just say a couple of things about how we can understand them as right view. So the Four Noble Truths are, of course, suffering, its cause in craving, the end of suffering, and the way to the end of suffering. And the word that's being translated as suffering is dukkha, which has all sorts of connotations. Suffering's one translation, another good one is unsatisfactoriness. So in right view, we're aiming to understand the world more deeply in terms of the Four Noble Truths. I think there's a simpler way of looking at the Four Noble Truths, and that's to see them as two tasks, two interconnected tasks. The first task is to understand suffering and its cause. And the second part of the task is to let go of the cause of that suffering. And that's what I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about now. So in the Dharma, suffering doesn't just mean, it's really important to realize this, doesn't just mean present physical and mental suffering. So it doesn't just mean things like a toothache or a broken heart. There are deeper levels to our suffering that the Buddha is talking about, two in particular. There's the suffering of change, the fact that we live in a world of transience. And so even if we're really enjoying something and things are going really well, there's some kind of subtle, pervasive sense of anxiety that at some point it's going to end. And then the third element of suffering that the Buddha talks about is the suffering of conditioned states. And this is the fact that we live in a world where so many things that really matter to us, we're simply not in control of. And that puts us in a very vulnerable position. And it's these other two levels of suffering that the Buddha is speaking about when he's asking us to deeply understand suffering. Second noble truth is the cause of suffering. And here the Buddha is basically saying, when you suffer, don't just look without, look within too. What are you thinking and doing and saying that is compounding the suffering? And this is traditionally put as the cause of suffering is craving, or the cause of suffering is craving, aversion, and delusion, because the three poisons come together. Now, I think a good way of thinking about this is to see suffering in your life as like a torch that illuminates the ways in which you are stuck. And there's a teacher in the Theravadan tradition who talks about suffering in this way. I'm going to read a short passage from her. It's Ayakema. She says that when we're suffering, we should say, aha, my old friend's here again. What am I supposed to learn this time? Suffering is our best teacher. because it hangs on to us and keeps us in its grip until we have learnt that particular lesson. Only then does suffering let us go. If we haven't learned our lesson, we can be quite sure that the same lesson is going to come again, because life is nothing but an adult education class. If we don't pass the subjects, we just have to sit the examinations again. Okay, so the Buddha is encouraging us to see suffering as a teacher that illuminates the ways in which our craving, our aversion, our delusion is causing us to suffer. So that's the first part of the task, understanding suffering more deeply. And then the second part follows naturally from that. It's the letting go of the causes of suffering as a result of seeing more deeply into the nature of your suffering. Just as you'd instinctually let go of a piece of hot coal when you realize how hot it is. So the second part of the Four Noble Truths, the second task, follows on from the first part. Just before I hand over to Mike, I just want to add three caveats to this that are very important. The first one is that this isn't some advice to somehow resist suffering or to not acknowledge the deep sadness or grief or whatever it is that you may be feeling. Quite the opposite. The suggestion is that through experiencing your suffering more deeply and more profoundly, you can come to see its causes. It's not about sort of British stiff upper lip being detached in a cold way. Second point to mention is that this does require a degree of faith. It requires a degree of faith that there is a way to the end of suffering. It requires faith in nirvana, that there is an end to suffering, albeit, you know, in sort of quite perhaps an embryonic form. It does require a degree of faith. And the third point to make is that it doesn't happen overnight. And you can't force it. It's a process. And it's a process that occurs in a way in its own time. You could almost say by an act of grace. It's not in your control, that the sort of letting go of suffering and the causes of suffering is not something that you can force. It's a process and it takes time to occur. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts on right view. I think without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Toby. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Toby's given a kind of practical understanding in a way of a concept, the Four Noble Truths, and I want to talk about images as a support for practice as well, and how they can help and support us. And I think in a way, it's okay, I'm just working out how I can see myself. There we go, as well. In a way, I'm kind of needing more support at the moment. You know, there's less collective practice as a source of inspiration in a way, and as vision, and that's often where I kind of find it. And you know, we've got Zoom, but I don't know about you. I keep having this experience where I'm kind of involved in this wonderful collective positive thing, but then I kind of press the leave meeting button and I'm just sort of back with myself, and I can sort of lose the thread in a way. And so, yeah, I think there are different ways we can keep the thread going, and images are one of them, but I think we probably need to dwell on them a bit. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you an image which is the Wheel of Life. which is found in Tibet, outside of the shrine room in the temples there. And yeah, I'll share my screen with you. And just for a moment, I just want you to look at the image and just notice the impact it has on you. And then I'll talk some more. Okay. Here's the technology. Ah, okay. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
So just take it in for a moment. Okay, so, well, it's a complex image, probably the first thing to say. This is quite a modern painting, I think. I think it's from Bhutan. But yeah, it's a complex image, so I'm certainly not going to try and explain all of it to you, and I probably wouldn't be able to anyway. But I do think that it's interesting how it correlates with the Four Noble Truths. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, how it expresses the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths visually. So yeah, the first and second noble truth that Toby talked about, you know, that life is characterized by suffering and the cause of suffering is craving. So when I look at the wheel, I suppose in a way I just kind of see life in all of its variety, this kind of multitude of human beings and their highs and lows and their joys and sufferings. But of course there's this big monster here holding the whole thing in place, pinning everything down. And we can see he's got his teeth on the top there. So it's the wheel itself here is an image of conditioned existence. So where's the suffering here? Well, in a way, I think it kind of communicates directly the sense of stuckness that we can, or maybe I can feel in my life sometimes. Yeah, this kind of sense of being hemmed in or held. So that's a source of suffering, but we could probably go further and look at aspects of the wheel in more detail. So around the outside here, you have the 12 Nidana chain. So these are, yeah, they're links. They're a description of cause and effect. And as we go all the way around, it communicates the cycle of birth, old age, death, and rebirth. So there's this cyclical pattern that's taking place. And yeah, it's often, the wheel itself is called the Bhava chakra, which is the wheel of becoming. So there's this sense of suffering, of kind of going round these rounds of rebirth. So yeah, my ideas on rebirth certainly aren't clear, but maybe to get another sense of this, we could look more closely at these realms here. So there's 6 realms within the wheel. There's the God realm, where everything is pleasant and pleasurable, life of ease. The Titan realm here, where there's conflict, competition, envy. The human realm here, which is kind of human life in all its variety again, a mixture. The animal realm down here, which is kind of driven by or characterized by sense pleasure. Sorry, not sense pleasure, but the senses certainly. The hell realm here, which is, yeah, just kind of intense distress. And the hungry ghosts here, which is characterized by craving, intense desire, but in a neurotic way. So Sangharakshita invites us to look at these as mental states, as psychological states, and that's certainly how I've found them useful, actually. And he invites us to look into the mirror, and he talks about this. And what he's talking about is, as we look into the mirror on different days, we see different kind of versions of ourselves depending on where we are within here. So it might be that things are going really kind of well for us, and there's this sense of ease and pleasure, and we find ourselves in the God realm. Or someone's kind of wronged us, or we're filled with envy and ill will, so we find ourselves in the Titan realm here. Or we're distraught and distressed, and we're in this hell realm. And I can certainly relate to that. And so this is the suffering that Toby was talking about, the suffering of change, that we're kind of blown around by external conditions, that our kind of hold on any one realm is tenuous, if you like. So what about the craving? So the wheel is kind of showing us cause and effect. And so if craving comes first and suffering after, well, I was thinking about that. In my experience, actually, it feels like suffering comes first, and then I sort of crave on the basis of suffering because I'm trying to do something different or fix a problem. But of course, the two are intertwined, and they're cyclical moment by moment. So without kind of wanting to oversimplify, we crave, and then but conditioned by that we suffer, and then there's more craving or aversion, and then we suffer again. So it's a kind of circle within a circle. And in the 12 Nidana chain here, we've got this sequence, these four here. So we've got contact, which is a woman and man embracing. So it's contact through the senses. So yeah, heat, touch, smell. We've got feeling tone or Vedana here. So this is a man with an arrow in his eye. And I always wonder what's happened between these two images for this to happen. But yeah, feeling tone, pleasant, painful, neutral. And then based on that feeling tone, here we have craving, a woman offering a drink to a man. So yeah, if our feeling tone is pleasant, we can just go into wanting more. Or if it's painful, we can push it away. And that causes more feeling, and we end up sort of going round in this area here. So to talk more personally, my spirit experience where I kind of find that, I think just at the moment, I've been noticing a lot of kind of talking to myself, like self-talk. It kind of seems louder at the moment. And one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is buy a house. And so I live in a rented house, and I'm trying to buy it off the landlord. And it involves all of these kind of conversations with different people and complications. And I'm finding I'm sort of planning my conversations with him and other people, and then filling in his part, and then sort of responding to that. And I've been noticing when I do that, there's this sort of holding in the body. There's a kind of tension or anxiety. Tension in the body. I'm holding something. It tends to happen when I eat, actually. I was eating a veggie burger the other day, and I was obviously doing this ruminating, and I was clenching the kind of bun and the burger, and I just noticed and unclenched. So I was thinking about the mechanics of that. And I think it's because I'm sort of desiring or craving a fixed outcome, which is to buy the house, obviously, at a certain price. And then there's me at the center, kind of pulling the levers of all of that. Like I can do that. I can fix the whole thing. And then there's this fear as well. There's this aversion of not getting what I want and continuing to rent. And it's all very sort of me focused in a way. It's all about me. And then I kind of try to fix that through more sort of ruminating. So it's this spiral. Sorry, this cycle. So yeah, Dharmashalan was talking in his talk about kind of moving towards growing up. What did we want to be when we were older? I think the wheel is an example of something that we want to kind of move away from in a way, or at least loosen from. And I think in Tibet, that's why it's on the outside of the shrine room and not on the inside. It's almost like the kind of stick of images, you know, sort of giving you a kick up the bum to kind of go and actually practice. Okay, so the third and fourth noble truth, freedom from suffering and the path leading to it. So I just want to highlight the Buddha here in the top left-hand corner. So the Buddha pointing to the moon. And of course, the Buddha is the example of the possibility of freedom from suffering. And as he points to the moon, he's pointing out the path, he's pointing out the way. And the point of departure is this gap between suffering and craving. So I'm just going to stop sharing now. Okay. So yeah, going back to my example, what helps me with this kind of self-talk, it's this awareness of holding in the body. And then that gives me a chance to find some space somehow and find an alternative to kind of more self-talk. So I think I'm kind of slowing down the jump from suffering to craving and doing something different. And that could be just reflecting on the luck I have even to sort of have that problem of wanting to buy a house and kind of trusting it's going to be fine. And yeah, whatever future I arrive in, it's my mental states that are going to dictate whether I'm happy in that future or not, and kind of having more trust in that. And so there's this kind of healthy detachment, a sort of freeing from the wheel. And I think it's a sort of freedom by degrees. And that's what Toby was talking about, I think, in this process. It's not as if I'm sort of on it or off, you know, it's kind of this loosening. So I still care, but it's not so much with me at the center. And I think actually that's the point where I can really start to care properly about other people. And yeah, the less I fix the future, the more kind of agreeable it seems to be and the smoother it goes. And I think it's at this stage that the wheel itself becomes beautiful, because my experience, it's in the fifth stage of the metta bhavana. If I can bring to mind this kind of multitude of humanity, all of them, including myself, striving to be happy, that's really beautiful in a way. And I think this is what the Buddha is getting at when he describes the lotus flowers growing out of the mud. It's beautiful. And so, yeah, this is a kind of small beginning in a way. But yeah, instead of suffering, causing more craving, there's this alternative. And that, of course, is faith. And Sangharakshita said that faith is the positive spiritual counterpart to craving. And I think faith for me on that kind of small level is just trust in a different process to the cyclical one of the wheel. And that, of course, is the path. And it's characterized by this succession of more refined, open, higher mental states. And it leads away from the wheel. And that, of course, is the spiral path. And Sangharakshita talks about this, and it's this 12 positive conditions, starting with faith, conditioning gladness, which then conditions rapture, tranquility, happiness, concentration, and all the way to freedom. So Padmasambhava says in the book Advice to the Lotus Born, he says, if you have faith in your heart, you must make it endure. And if you don't, you must make it arise. And I think reflecting on images, reflecting on the wheel and the spiral and the gap between suffering and craving is a good way of doing that. Okay. We have some questions. So in a moment, Dharmashalin's going to ping you into breakout rooms. And I think we can have about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Thanks. So I'll tell you the questions now. Here we go. I'm still working this out. Okay. I'll tell you the questions now and I'll put them into the chat box as well. So the questions are, can you think of a time when the story you were telling yourself about someone or a situation turned out to be wrong and caused you and others suffering? Next, can you think of when a difficulty in your life has spurred you to stay more in the gap? And thirdly, what images and or concepts help you to maintain vision and faith? So you can talk about all of them, or you could choose one that you wanted to focus on.
Mike, can you just repeat those for everybody?
Yeah. Can you still hear me? Can you think of a time when the story you were telling yourself about someone or a situation turned out to be wrong, caused you and others suffering? Can you think of when a difficulty in your life has spurred you to stay more in the gap? What images and or concepts help you to maintain vision and faith?